Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Wendy Cromash. Welcome to today's Levy lecture. We are so happy to see you. Today we have Donna Washington, who is going to be telling us, teaching us, telling us stories all about Juneteenth. I would like to thank the Levy Senior Center Foundation for their help and support in hosting these lectures. Without them, we would not be able to do it. Let me tell you just a little bit about Donna. Donna is an animated, multicultural folklorist who uses vocal pyrotechnics, non-pedestrian language, language games, creative drama, and tales from many lands throughout time to bring learning through laughter. She is a master storyteller, artist, educator. She's been performing for 30 years. She went to school at Northwestern. She has 9 storytelling CDs that have garnered over 26 awards, 26 national awards, excuse me. She's authored numerous articles about storytelling and education, including contributions to the award-winning book, Social Studies in the Storytelling Classroom. She's the author of 4 children's books and has served as the president of the North Carolina Storytelling Guild and on the editorial board of the National Association of Black Storytellers. Welcome again to the Levy Lecture Series. Donna, take it away.
Thank you so much, Wendy. It's always weird to me when people read my bio because I always think, did I do all of that? Yes. Okay. So here we go. My name is Donna Washington. I've actually been a storyteller. This is my 33rd year doing this. And I'm honored to be here at the Levy Center again this year. And we are talking about Juneteenth. Now, before I jump in and start telling stories and doing all that stuff, I'm not sure if everybody knows what Juneteenth is. It might be why you tuned in. So most of America probably didn't know what Juneteenth was at all until last year when things kicked off and suddenly, large swaths of America became aware that there was an alternate freedom festival for African Americans in America. There are a number of African Americans who do not think of July 4th as Freedom Day, mostly because July 4th did not change the status of enslavement in America. So I have a lot of dates. I'm the worst when it comes to dates, so I'm gonna refer to my notes here, but I don't do that a lot. The reason why we have Juneteenth is because in 1862, Abraham Lincoln declared that all enslaved people in the Confederate States were free. He made that declaration, and after General Lee surrendered, all of the enslaved people were supposed to be free. However, Texas was kind of strange. Still is. And I say that, and I didn't grow up in Texas. Both of my parents are from Texas. And for a big chunk of my childhood in the Army, traveling all over the world, I considered my home base Texas. So I'm saying this from a place of love. Texas can be an odd place. But at that point in history, it was far removed from the rest of the country. When we think of the North and the South and the Civil War, we don't necessarily think of Texas. Well, Texas was a territory, and people had been leaving the South with their enslaved people, with their enslaved population, and they took them to Texas to work the land there and raise animals and do all of that. And when the Civil War ended, they didn't find out about it. At least they didn't tell anybody about it. Nobody seemed to know. So it wasn't until 1865 when Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, which is an island off of Texas, part of Texas. And he read this proclamation. It says, I'll to quote, "The people of Texas are informed that, in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported to idleness, either there or anywhere else." Well, most of the people, the enslaved people, at least the story goes, that were in the general vicinity when this happened, when there was the announcement that all the enslaved were free, a whole bunch of them didn't stay for that second part where they talked about, now you have to go back home and work for wages. They didn't stay for that. They were like, what? We're free. Hooray. And they took off. They just left things where they were to spread the word that they were no longer enslaved. And there was this huge brouhaha, right? That they had barbecues and picnics and just like there was this huge jubilee celebration, free. And that's how the story goes, that on that day in June, for the first time, African Americans were completely free everywhere in the country. At least they knew about it. There were over 250,000 people enslaved in Texas when they found out that they no longer were enslaved. And so that is the story of Juneteenth and why African Americans celebrate it. But here's the thing about Juneteenth. The day after everyone found out they were free, there were all kinds of questions to be asked, like, what does that mean? And the proclamation says, you are free to go and be and do everything that is American. But there were some problems. And what I want to talk about today is thinking about Juneteenth, and you think about free. What does it mean? What does it mean that we're talking about freedom? And how did that translate into the American story? And here in 2021, when we are in June and June 19th, we're going to be celebrating Juneteenth. What are we called to do? Like July 4th, we're called to celebrate America's victory, right? Our freedom. Memorial Day, we're called to celebrate the people who gave their lives for our country, in service of our country. Christmas, we're called, well, depending on what religion you belong to, you're called to remember the religious sacrifice of the Savior, Christianity. If you're not religious and you still celebrate Christmas, it's the season of loving and caring and giving. If you celebrate Hanukkah, what are you celebrating? Celebrating the miracle of lights. There's things we celebrate for holidays. What are we called to do for Juneteenth? And so that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today, and why we're called to do that thing. So I'm going to start by presenting a story that comes out of the African American diaspora, or the African diaspora, which is often a thing that we do during Juneteenth celebrations. We talk about places that Africans came from, celebrate their stories, and celebrate the history that became part of the cultural fabric of America. So our first story for you today is called Peaceful Kingdom. There was once a peaceful kingdom where all the creatures lived well together. They shared what they had, and they believed in the philosophy of plenty. Now, the philosophy of plenty is a philosophy that animates quite a number of cultural African situations. Village life was often looked at through the eyes of the philosophy of, why can't I say this word? Philosophy of plenty. And it's this: if I have something and you need it and I can spare it to give it to you, or I don't share it with you and something happens to you, I'm responsible for that. Because by my being selfish, by my not sharing, you came to harm, and I could have prevented that. And so the animals in this very peaceful kingdom, why, they believed in the philosophy of plenty. Into the midst of their world came a lion, a really lazy lion. He looked around. He saw all this meat running around with no one bothering it. And he had an idea. He called all the animals to him and he said, all right, I am your new king. This is what you're going to do. Every single day, someone's going to come up to where I'm going to make my home up in the grasslands up there and bring me something to eat. And if I like what you bring me, I will be happy. If I don't like it, you'll find out what happens. Well, the animals had never had a king before, but this sounded great. A king could just make things work even better. So they saw where he went up and made his home in a grassland that was not terribly far away from where they lived. And the next morning, ground squirrel got up. The ground squirrel in Southern Africa is called a xerus. And the xerus got up, Southern and Eastern Africa, and he got up and he said, oh, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring him something lovely. And the xerus got roots, because that's what the xerus likes to eat, roots and seeds, and a nice big platter. And 5 of them lifted that thing up and carried it into the grasslands. And they didn't come back. Well, everyone thought, well, maybe the king was displeased. I wonder what he did. Well, it doesn't matter. I'm sure that they'll be back later. Well, the next morning, Dick got up. Now, Dick is like a little antelope. And Dick said, oh, I know. I like leaves. I like leaves and I like berries. And I'm sure that I will take leaves and berries to the king and he will be happy. So Dick got like a platter of fruits and leaves, carried it on up to the grasslands. And Dick did not come back. Well, next morning, Warthog got up and Warthog said, I'll go. I know exactly what to bring. And so Warthog, well, he got more roots and he got berries and got seeds and insects. He ate all, got all these things together, put them up, and Warthog didn't come back. Now, the other animals were starting to get a little concerned about this. They thought, we need to figure out what this king wants to eat. Rabbit, however, Rabbit was suspicious. Rabbit did not trust that the king was just maybe letting them go or banishing them or something. He was kind of worried about this. Plus, he'd heard a thing or two about lions, and this didn't seem like it was going to work out well for them. So he came up with a plan. Rabbit went to the rest of the animals and said, okay, tomorrow I will go and bring King his dinner. And everyone looked at Rabbit because Rabbit, well, he could be a little bit unreliable. They said, Rabbit, you're going to, oh yeah, I'm going to do it. Just let me do it. I'll be good. It's okay. So Rabbit, well, he didn't collect anything. Everybody's watching to see what he was going to get. He didn't collect anything. He didn't get any berries or roots or seeds or anything. And they said, Rabbit, aren't you going to bring the king something? And he said, oh, I am, I promise. What are you going to bring him? I already have it prepared. Well, when Rabbit got out of sight of everyone, he got some red mud. He streaked it on his fur. And then he started going up to the king. And when he got nearby, he went, oh. And the king perked his ears up and he said, oh, dinner's coming. He looked. It was Rabbit. And he said, what's wrong with you? And Rabbit said, I brought you the most wonderful dinner, but this other lion jumped out and stole it. Now, the king didn't really care about that. What he did care about was another lion. I mean, he had a good thing going on right here. He did not want to share it with anybody. And so he said, where is this other lion? And the rabbit said, I don't want to take you. Take me. Okay. And so the rabbit led the lion to a big hole in the ground, a big stone wall. And the lion looked down and sure enough, there was another lion down there. It was a big one too, with big mane. he went, bah! Scared the other lion. The other lion went, ah! Just louder than he was. So he thought, I'm going to show him. He showed his teeth. And the lion that was down at the bottom of that hole showed his teeth. His teeth were big. He showed his claws. And the lion down there in that hole, he showed his claws. And he thought, you know what? I'm going to have to fight him. And lions don't always want to do that because, you could get hurt. But sometimes you have to stand up for your territory. So the lion jumped into the hole and splash right into the bottom of a well. And he did not get out. Rabbit went back to the rest of the animals and said, the king has decided to leave. Well, they thought, well, is he going to come back? I don't think so. Well, everyone was kind of sad. It was kind of interesting to have a king, but they went right back to their lives and everything was peaceful once again. So I like that story for this particular talk because everybody had a completely different idea about what was happening, right? The king was like, they're bringing me supper and they're very happy to do it. He's taking advantage of them. The animals are trying to please the king without getting the fact that they are the supper. And the rabbit, of course, realized what's going on. He's trying to solve the problem. Which brings us to Juneteenth. When General Granger announced that the enslaved were free to go, if this is indeed how it happened, because again, lots of times holidays, you make up stories around them. When he made that announcement and there was all this jubilation, what exactly were they celebrating? What was happening? Well, in the minds of African Americans at that time, based on the readings that I have done, and based on the kinds of things that happened around that event, the freeing of the enslaved, there was this idea that they were now on even footing with the people who had enslaved them. They were the same. That was the belief. Because there had never been a belief that they were lesser humans. They didn't believe that. So now that they were free, it was the same. They could go where they liked and do what they wanted to do. And they had thoughts about what they wanted that to be. They wanted to live in houses. They wanted to work as they wanted to work. They wanted to eat higher up on the hog. I don't know if you've ever heard that expression, high on the hog. And basically it has to do with what parts of the animal you get to eat. The lower down in the pecking order you are, the less of the good stuff you get, to the point where you might be trying to find some way to eat pig hooves, pig feet. And as you probably know, in almost every culture in the world, the poorest people made the best food because they were cooking with what they had left. In Louisiana, the landowners, they got the lobsters and all the big crabs and all that. And the people on the ground, they got the crawfish, the crawdads, and anything else they could pull up out of the swamp. They were eating that. And eventually, of course, now that's like the expensive cuisine. Those things are expensive. It's hard to get them and they're expensive. But back in the day, that's just what people had to eat. So, pig's feet. That's something you find in a lot of low country dishes. Here in North Carolina, we have low country. In South Carolina, you have low country, high country. Well, when you talk about the dregs of something, they weren't eating the bacon. They were eating the hooves, the little pig feet. Anyway, you got to eat higher up on the hog. That's what that was going to mean. And there's another saying that's from the South called picking in high cotton. Picking in high cotton is easier than picking in low cotton, because if it's high, you get to stand up and you can pull it off. If it's low, you're down, your back is bent and you're picking up off the ground or lower. So the idea was they had options. What exactly were the people who just enslaved them thinking? They had generational free labor. They had something completely. How do you even value this work? And how do you pay for it? If you're used to not paying for it, your idea is to pay as little as possible. But you've also been providing room and board. Does it mean you don't have to provide room and board anymore? Do they have to pay it back in rent? How is any of this going to work? And where is everybody going to go? And what are they going to do? It's been illegal for them to own anything up until that second. And now they're free to go do what? Where? But at that moment, it didn't matter. Juneteenth was just about, woohoo, let's go, I don't know, over the hill and out yonder. But right after the African Americans were freed, once there were no more enslaved people in the country, African Americans really started living the life. I mean, there were no holds barred for generations of people who've been dreaming of having no holds barred. All sorts of things happened. Started learning to read and write. Many of the African American laborers were skilled labor. They did all of the crafting, like, you know, they were stonemasons, they were carvers, they were architects. One of the most interesting tours I took when I was younger was I was at a plantation, a rice plantation in Charleston, and they were talking about one of the men who had been enslaved there, who'd helped design some of the buildings in downtown Charleston. You know, he had, because of the years of his work, and he was a draftsman, he was gorgeous at drawing. He was designing buildings, and of course, he didn't make, and not a penny of that money came to him. It went to the man who owned him. And then when he was freed, he was off to go and try to find work on his own. So they thrived right at this point. There was a celebration, like a renaissance for them, obviously, a rebirth in the country. And it changed the South in a lot of ways. Like I said, suddenly they were employees. Probably the most drastic change that I can think of was over the course of this last week, because I've been thinking about what I was going to say today, happened in Charleston, South Carolina. I don't know how many of you know this, but Charleston, South Carolina used to be the biggest producer of rice in the country. They cleared out the land, they repurposed the swamps, and they planted rice here. It grew, it was harvested, it was amazing. It was backbreaking work. And the entire staff was enslaved. All the people who worked in these plantations, these rice plantations, were enslaved. And it was the reason Charleston became such a huge, rich, gorgeous city, is because of these plantations. The day independence came to those people in the early 1860s, they left, because that was back-breaking, horrible labor. They up and left. And the people who owned those plantations were quite shocked that the people who'd worked them all their lives would not stay there. They got easier work everywhere else, you know, mopping floors, any other kind of work they could get, rather than working out in those rice fields. So they attempted to hire people to work in those rice fields, and found out very quickly that they could not pay anybody to do the labor that they had been forcing the enslaved people to work. And the rice fields disappeared. You can still get rice in Charleston, but it's really like not a big crop. Obviously, Charleston is not known for its varieties of rice that it sells. So Juneteenth meant a reconfiguring of the South and a rebirth, or, well, yeah, a rebirth of what it meant to be African American in the South. Now, as I was thinking about all of this in terms of how we celebrate and what we celebrate, I was thinking about politics. Yeah, I know, maybe it doesn't always line up that way, but I thought to myself, who was the first Black person ever elected to office in America? Like, who was that? Well, it turns out that it happened in 1776. Yep. In 1776, when we established America, we had there was a Black man who was elected to office. His name was Wentworth Chaswell, and he was elected to the school board in Virginia. I just thought that was cool. I didn't know that. And over the course of years, there was one here and one there. They're elected to state representative and all across the South. And after Juneteenth, the first man his name was Joseph Rainey in 1870. So they were freed in 1865, 1870. 1865 was when Juneteenth happened. 1870, first Black man elected to office. He was from South Carolina. His name was Joseph Rainey. And there was a string of African American politicians elected to high office right after the freeing of the enslaved people. A couple of them had been slaves, been enslaved, and they were in office, which is, a huge celebration of that. Like, where are you going? This is where you're going. And for years, you saw this string of statesmen elected from the South. Black people started going to school and gaining wealth and establishing schools. The way that African Americans saw themselves in the country was that they were as American as anyone else, and all of it belonged to us, just as all of it belonged to everybody else. And anything that we could accomplish, we could accomplish. And it was an amazing time of growth and expansion. But there was another part of this. Just in the peaceful kingdom, everyone had a different idea what was going on. There's that piece in the proclamation. I'll read that piece to you again. It says, the freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. They're informed they will not be allowed to collect at military posts, and they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere. Now, partly this is because during the war, the enslaved would escape and go to military bases where they would be taken in. And because they weren't allowed to receive stolen property, which is what I guess runaway enslaved people were, they called them contraband. They just labeled them that, contraband. And they either shipped them north or they gave them things to do. But they were not enslaved. They were free, I guess, even though they were still in the South. They were on the northern land, military captured land. So they did not want, what they didn't want when they made this proclamation was 250,000 people to rush to garrisons and try to get out of the South. So like, go home, work for wages. So they were asking them to do a thing that they had never done before. So even though they were free, there was this idea that something had to be done, but not now. It can wait. We'll figure this out. And then there were the people who had enslaved them, who now had to pay them. Do you wonder why certain workers in our country have the lowest paid type of jobs, service jobs? That's pretty much what African Americans were doing at that point, except for, the really skilled workers. A lot of them considered service jobs. And so they were going to try to pay them as little as possible, because ideally, if you pay people as little as possible, they can't leave. Where we call that term, slave wages, or you are enslaved by your employer because they don't pay you enough to actually go do something else. And that's a practice that's been done across the ages to keep people sort of shackled to their work. That is definitely what was going on in the South. So people were moving and making choices. And because the enslaved people hadn't had anything anyway, they didn't mind throwing out the shackles and just going, yeah, I will go try to find something else to do. I won't accept the, 2 pennies or whatever that you're trying to offer me. So there was a lot of movement going on. There was migration south and north and everywhere. Juneteenth marked a huge milestone. That's all I'm trying to say, in the way African Americans lived in America. But as I said, just because African Americans saw themselves like everybody else doesn't mean the people who had enslaved them felt that way about it. And the South I live in North Carolina. The South got a little crusty about all of this. Because if you tell yourself the story that you have to tell yourself for generations, that the reason why all of these people are enslaved is because they can't take care of themselves, they're not smart enough to take care of themselves, and they're not really people the way other people are people, or white people are people. They're not really like that. And then suddenly they're out doing whatever they want and they're fine. That doesn't fit well. There's got to be something wrong. And we had a backlash in this country, huge backlash to the jubilation. And as most of you might guess what that is, and of course it's Jim Crow. Jim Crow, the Klan, all of the various groups that did not exist prior to emancipation. And their only goal seems to have been stopping all of this jubilation, stopping all of this growth, stopping all of the possibilities. And we went from a country in which everything is possible because there was no more laws stopping it, because we had laws about the enslaved and laws about freed people, to just straight up making laws about what people of color could not do. Just could not. You stay in your place. And as some of you may have seen, like the show that came on The Watchmen about the burning of Black Wall Street, anytime you ended up with a group of African Americans doing really well in the South, a lot of times there was a counter move to stop it. So what are we celebrating at Juneteenth? If being part of Juneteenth caused, or the belief, of course, is that Juneteenth was the cause of all this brouhaha. The backlash against emancipation was huge. And to the point of where, this I found kind of interesting, the last, so 1860, my brain doesn't work so good, 1865 was the year that we had our Juneteenth, the last year when slavery was legal in America, all right? It was 1865. 1870 was the very first African American elected to high office from the South. 5 years after the last emancipation, we had a man named Joseph Rainey, who was elected to the state representative, he was a representative from South Carolina. 5 years. And he is a former slave. There was then a string of representatives all throughout state government that were Black, some of whom had been enslaved, some of whom not, that were represented in state councils, in city councils, at the United States government. There were lots of them. They showed up all over the place. Then the last one before Jim Crow really hit was in 1897. In 1897, a fellow named George Henry White was the last one that sort of was part of that jubilation, that growth, that outspringing. And then Jim Crow got uglier and uglier, and more restrictions were put in place, including, obviously, voting. And when they denied African Americans the right to vote and live in various places, and when they changed the rules, after 1897, the next African American person to be elected from the South was in 1973. It's Barbara Jordan from Texas. between 1897, 1973, between that big gap, there was a lot of destruction that went on in this country. A lot of work to stop the jubilation, to make the fact that Juneteenth had happened be not important. And yet still every year with barbecue and potato salad and chicken and ribs, all the various things that apparently they were barbecuing on Juneteenth in Texas. Every year it's celebrated, and every year African Americans tell the story of finding out that we had a chance. Every year that we had the right to be part of this country. What isn't often told are the stories of how hard some people in the country tried to stop it. Those stories do not get told. It's always about triumph, always about going forward. And we tell personal stories as well as folkloric stories. Because you have to have hope, right? It has to have hope. And so I'm going to tell a personal piece of personal narrative that I call Election Night. It's part of a longer piece I have called Chairs in the Trees. And I'm telling it because part of what we do in Juneteenth is to celebrate the victories, even though it feels like sometimes there aren't any. And after this last year, what with the Black Lives Matters movement and the current round of voter suppression that's going on in states, it feels important to tell these kinds of stories, to talk about them, to understand that there is light even when it feels like things are getting crazy or horrible. And this story, like I said, it's called Election Night. And it goes like this. The week before Obama was elected the first time, I was traveling in the northern part of the state where I live, in North Carolina. I was up in the mountains, and I'd been performing for about a week. I'd been away from home for about a week and a half. And I don't know what it is about this business of like the presidential election, but except for the last one, up until the last one, every single election for the president that had happened, I have been away from home. Now, my husband is my business manager. You think he could sort that, but every single time, the last time I was home was when W won the first time. That was the last time I was home, except for this last year during COVID. I was always out somewhere. And I was almost every time I was in a community where everybody was voting differently than I was. And I knew this because of the signs and whatever. So the week that Obama, the election for Obama was happening, I was up in the mountains, and I drove up at night in the dark. I stay at the Hampton Inn. I pull into my driver's space, on my parking space. I go in, I check in. My room is the first room off the lobby. Not a problem. Next morning, I get up first thing, and my contact in the area, his name is Dwayne Coley, and he wants to take me to my first school so I don't have to drive around and try to figure out where things are. He's going to show me around, take me to my first school, take me to lunch. So I get in his car, and he says, "There's something I need to tell you." I said, "Yes, what is it?" He said, "The FBI is in town." And I thought, I don't know why you're telling me this. They're not looking for me. And then I thought, oh, maybe there's like a serial killer loose or something. I go, "Why is the FBI in town?" He said, "Well, we have about 6 elderly Black couples left in our area here, and they live kind of far out, and somebody has been burning crosses on their lawns." And I thought, that's terrible, because that is terrible. Now, did I make any connection with why he would be telling me that? Nope. I didn't live there. So we went to our first school, and as we're traveling there through this neighborhood, there are McCain Palin signs everywhere. And I personally, I think it's cool. The more people who work and contribute to our politics, the better. We only get the country we participate in. So I want you to participate. So I show up at these schools, and I am seeing girls with Sarah Palin glasses, but no glass, just the glasses, because she was so stylish. And the kids were talking about the election. It was amazing. And all through the week, I was there. And on Saturday, I did a thing that I do in a lot of places, especially when they're homogenous places. And when I say homogenous, I mean, I am the color. They have imported the color. Nobody else in the community tends to look like me. And so they invited me to perform at the library. And I show up at the library, and I've been in middle schools and high schools. I haven't been in any of the elementary schools in this area. And I show up at the library on Saturday, and this little guy walks in. He's got to be 7. He takes one look at me and says, "Oh, she's black." And I said, "Yes, I am." And his mother was so embarrassed. She's like, "Oh." And she brought him in. They all sit down. And I always try to tell stories that are appropriate to the area I'm in. It's like if I'm up in Appalachia, I can do some Appalachian folklore. So I'm telling stories that are part of the Afro-Latin tradition, which is African American and Appalachian. There's a whole lot of mixing that goes on. That's another lecture. And when it's over, I'm everybody's cousin, everybody's sister, everybody's mother-in-law. Oh my gosh, I haven't heard that story since I was 6. My father used to tell me that story. They're all really excited about the stories. And the kids are going, "You know that story? You didn't tell me that story." And I get the storyteller payoff. People are walking back to their cars. Some of them are weeping. "Oh, I haven't you brought my great grandmother here." And they're walking into their cars and they're telling their kids the stories. And their kids are like looking at them like, "Wow, you know stories too." To me, coolest thing ever. So I am having a great time doing all of this in this area. And I get in, I have to tell you, I have a little Saturn, and on the back of my Saturn, it says "Mama for Obama." And the last couple of days I'm there, I am not in the community that I'm in. I'm in an even further north one. That happens sometimes when I'm going to be in an area. My husband, manager person, sends out flyers, or like at this point, emails to other people, other communities, and asks if I'm in the area, would you like to, piggyback on what this company is doing or this group is doing, and then you can have a show for a reduced fee. And since they can't afford to bring me up by themselves, it works out. So I was in a far community the night of the election. And it was a goodly drive, like an hour from where my hotel was. And there was no other hotel up there. Otherwise, I would have just stayed in the area. So after the show, I'm in the office, and I have a problem. I never stop talking. Never. So I'm in the office at the end of the school day. I'm talking to the secretary and the principal, and they're like, "Oh my God, that was a great show. We had a lot of fun. Kids, a lot of fun. There were great questions. We're chatting. And I look up and realize the buses are there. Oh. So now I'm gonna have to wait for the buses to leave, and it's gonna take me an extra hour. And so we're chatting. And then the buses leave, and now I have an hour drive home through the mountains. And by the time I get back to the area where my hotel is, it's dark. And I think, you know what? I didn't even stop and get lunch. I just wanted to get back here. I'm in a dinner. I'm going to stop at, there's like a fast food restaurant. I'm going to like a hamburger or something. I'm going to drive in, get a hamburger. This was before I was gluten-free. And then I'll go back to my hotel. So I drive in, and I see that above the little squawky talk box where you order your food, there's a sign that says closing early. And I thought, I know why they're closing early. Because this place hires teeny boppers. And I bet they all want to stay home and watch the election. That is so cool. So I order my food, I drive around, and sure enough, little teeny bopper boy looks out of the window. And I'm one of the last people because they're about to close down, for the election. And I want to check and see if my idea is right. So I say to him, this little guy, I say, "So, why are you closing early?" And he looks straight at me. And he says, "In case they riot." Okay, I'm pretty sure I didn't get less black from the time I ordered the food until the time I got to that window. What was he talking about? what does he think's gonna happen and there are like 6 elderly Black couples left in the area. What are they going to do? We're all going to get together and menace a street lamp? What? And I'm laughing, I'm chuckling about this as he gives my food, because this kid doesn't realize it, but he has inned me and othered me in the same sentence. And as I'm driving away, I think about the rhetoric that's been going around during this election, right? The election basically is about telling white America that Black America is going to descend on it and burn it down. But I was not a horde of burn it down people. I was a lady at the drive-thru. He looked right at me without understanding that I am Black, but I didn't count as Black because I was just a lady at a drive-thru. The thing he was afraid of doesn't exist. There aren't hordes of people, Black people out trying to burn down America. They're not out there. They're home watching the election like everybody else. So anyway, I'm just amused at the ridiculousness of that. And I get over to my hotel and I can't find any place to park my car. Not a place. I'm like, why is this parking lot so full? So I find a place. I pull my little car in, and I've got a big walk back to the front door, and I got my little bag of greasy food, and I get to the front door, and I realize why I can't find any place to park, because there's a watching party, a viewing party going on at the hotel. There's a big screen, and Fox News is on the big screen, and the lobby is packed with people. And that's when all the things that have been going on around me hit me for the first time. And I realize I'm in a community where someone is burning crosses on people's lawns, and somebody has to know who's doing it, and they just have decided not to tell the FBI. I'm in a community where I am the color. I mean, they're homogenous and I'm the color, and they think Black people are coming to get them, and I'm the only Black person in the area. I'm in a community where they're watching Fox News, and I have to pass between them and Fox News to get to my room, which is just one off the lobby. And for the very first time in my life, and I mean the first time, because I am an Army brat. I have lived in South Korea and Japan. I have lived all over this country. I've been in like 6 or 7 states. I've been to Europe. I've been to South America. I've been to Canada. I've been all over America. I always felt like I belonged. No one ever made me feel like I was an outsider. But the first time that happened to me, when I felt like I was an other, I was in my own country, in my own state. I thought, I can't walk through this lobby. I was terrified. I thought, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to back up, and I'm going to go in the back door, and no one will know I'm in here. And as I began to back up, I swear to you, I heard my great-grandmother, Topsy Lewis, whose grandmother was enslaved. Topsy Lewis, I heard her voice. She said to me, your money is the same color as their money. If you can't go in the front door, you cannot go in that hall. And I thought, if I walk through this lobby, I got 10 seconds of discomfort maybe. But if I go to the back door, someday I will die. And Topsy Lewis will be standing there. And I will have to spend eternity trying to explain to her why I went in a back door. I'm going to the lobby. So I just steeled myself and I walked straight through the lobby. Were they looking at me? I have no idea. I had my eyes on the place right outside my door. I got there, I got into the room, and everything stopped working. I stopped breathing. My hands started shaking. My knees buckled. I fell to the ground. I dropped everything. I thought I was having a heart attack. And then I remembered. I remembered watching a show, The Big Bang Theory. And at one point, Sheldon has a panic attack. And the thing that was happening to me sounded exactly like what he was describing. And I thought, oh, okay, calm down. You're not dying. You're having a panic attack. I had no idea I was that scared. I was like, just breathe, just make yourself breathe, just make yourself breathe. And so it's like, your legs don't work, that's fine. You can work with that later. But if you stop breathing, that's a problem. So I made myself breathe. It took me 10 minutes to get up off the floor and collect myself. And by now my greasy food is cold. And I went over and I called my husband because he would be waiting for my call. And I said, he asked, are you okay? I said, I'm fine. Because what was I going to do? I couldn't tell him what was going on. What can he do? Like drop his life and drive 3 hours to come and do what? Sit with me? So I told him I was fine. Some light banter, we got off the phone. I watched the election. And at first, of course, in the room, people were screaming and really excited. And then as it went on, they got quieter and quieter and quieter. Juneteenth won in 2008. The promise of what could be, the promise of what we could all be. What's the story, right? Any American child, if you work hard and you believe in yourself, you could become the next American president. Yeah, it worked. It was amazing. My father, who grew up in segregated Texas, he didn't believe it was ever going to be possible. He didn't believe there'd ever be a Black president. And my mother was convinced someone was going to shoot him. The fact that he did become president and he survived all the way through, both of my parents, absolutely shocked. I know there were a lot of people who were absolutely shocked by that. So what do we celebrate in Juneteenth? We are celebrating the promise that things can get better. But we're also celebrating the fact that we have the potential to get things better by work that we do, that the work of our hands matters, that us being Americans matters, that the choices that we get to make can matter. Even in the face of today, knowing that there are states where they're working hard to suppress the vote, even in the face of that, we can make choices and we can choose our own fate. So what does it mean to be free? It means to be responsible. It means to make the world that you want to live in look like the world you want to live in. And that's why we celebrate Juneteenth. Because the sky is the limit and we will keep pushing. Thank you very much for sharing that with me today. And Wendy, if you want to open up the Q&A, if you guys have any questions you want to ask, I'm here to answer them.
That was so inspiring and moving and dramatic and just amazing. Amazing. Did you cry that night?
I was too scared. As it got quieter in the other room, I wanted to be jumping up and down. I mean, the amount of joy. Well, yeah, I guess that's true. I did watch the speech that he gave. And I did. I mean, I did weep at that point. I was like, oh my gosh, look at this. But yeah, I was trying to make people forget I was in that room.
I expected you to say when you got into your hotel room that you burst into tears.
I was too scared.
Was your car damaged the next day?
Nope. And that was something I was worried about. This is part of a longer series of stories called Chairs in the Trees. So I stopped it there because it was appropriate to stop it there. But no, my car was not damaged. But I did worry about that because I had a Mama for Obama sticker on the back of my car. It wasn't damaged. Everyone's very nice. I couldn't, the one thing I didn't put in there that happened the next morning is it was my last morning there. I was going to have my breakfast and leave. And as I was leaving the breakfast room, somebody yelled at me, "I bet you're happy." And I don't know who it was. I just turned around and said, "Yes, I am." And then I packed my stuff and got out of there.
What can you say? Lydia would like to know, do you think that Juneteenth will become a national holiday?
It may at some point. I think that, there's this kind of interesting thing that happens with African American holidays, right? So Kwanzaa is a good example of this. People get really touchy about African American holidays. The thing I get with people is Kwanzaa is made up. And my response is all holidays are made up. Just some of them were made up more recently than other ones. Juneteenth is a new holiday, it would be. And it's not meant to rival July 4th. It's not meant to do that. It is a very specific thing. Do I think it would be cool if we had another holiday where we ate barbecue and told African American stories and explained the history of African Americans in America? I think it would be fabulous. Would it become a national holiday? That would be fabulous too, I think. So.
I hope this question doesn't sound.
You know what? It's going to sound how it sounds. If you want to ask,
okay.
Go on.
Can white people celebrate Juneteenth?
Can non-Christian people celebrate Christmas?
They can, but in that instance, I would ask, why would they want to?
Because it's fun.
Okay. Well, I mean, yes. I think religious holidays are different because, to me, it's associated with faith, but
right. But not everyone thinks about Christmas as that's one of the big arguments, right? It's no longer a religious holiday for lots of people. It's just a thing we do. Now, if you were asking, like, if you were living in Canada, could you celebrate the 4th of July? Well, you could, but it would be a little strange. Nobody will, there are no Juneteenth police. If you celebrate Juneteenth, there is no Black person who's going to come to your door and say, you are not allowed. So, and there is,
is it misappropriation? That's what obviously I know there's.
No, I think that as long as you are celebrating it, what I think would be really cool if people who aren't Black or people of color were celebrating it, to look at the actual history of America. Like, it could be a time when we tell the truth, like that whole business about, like, why do African Americans have this weird relationship with the police? Well, if you understand that the people who were slave catchers are the core of what our modern day police is, like, that's what that turned into, and that the same kind of policies that have always been problematic with African Americans, especially men, are still part of the modern day police force, even they don't understand why those traditions exist, that would be a thing to know. So if Juneteenth became a day of national truth telling about what happened, and think about how George Floyd's death changed drastically the way we talk about race in this country, and how there's huge backlashes against doing it. Juneteenth could definitely be a day where we tell the truth about what happened in America, and we celebrate the fact that it has changed, and that we look forward as activists to making it better or different.
Okay. When you just mentioned the police, are you aware of the book by Carol Anderson, The Second?
No.
Race and Guns and Fatally Unequal America? I heard her speak last night here at one of the fan lectures, and she talks about this very specifically, that the Second Amendment was designed to keep the power
in the hands of the
and
people.
Yes.
There's a lot of stuff we don't talk about in American history, and that we have changed, or as we put it, they whitewashed, right? Because it's uncomfortable. There's a lot of uncomfortableness about these things.
Yes.
Right.
And and admitting the truth. I read someone compare it this week to Nazi Germany. The Germans faced the reality of what had happened,
Right.
and it improved things in their country. Right. And we have not had that reckoning here.
In other countries, for instance, in South Africa, and I'm thinking about also Brazil and various places, and in Peru even, whenever they, like, I believe it was Peru where they had the Shining Path, which was a group of, it's either Peru or Argentina, I don't know which one, I don't remember. They had a group of militants that were sort of associated with the government that like slaughtered people, they committed genocide. And when that group was overthrown, they had a national referendum to talk about what had happened. The same thing happened in South Africa, where they had a national referendum to talk about apartheid and forced people to face each other. And our country, we're very loath to do that. But part of it is because then you have to deal with just as when emancipation came, right, Juneteenth, suddenly you were dealing with structures that did not serve the population that was currently there. If we face the structures in our country that have been built up through segregation and Jim Crow, we either have to get rid of them or change them. And a lot of people's wealth and power rests on keeping them exactly like they are. And those, unfortunately, are the same people who would be the people who would call these referendum. So how do you deal with that? We as a population would have to vote people into office who would be willing to take this on. And right now there's a really big percentage of our population that still doesn't even believe in white privilege.
Or who the president is, but okay. Yes, we digress. All right, let me get to some questions. When the restaurant worker said, in case they riot, I was wondering, I was wondering whether he was referring to angry white people.
That's not what we were being told in that referendum, in the election. Remember that election was about scary Black people. And
that kid never had any inkling that, okay.
Right, because he said, unless we riot, if he was talking about white people.
Right. Do you think racism is getting worse?
No, I think it's the same. I just think we see it now. So
is that because of cell phones?
Yes, that's about to say. The question of like, why do Black people have issues with police officers? And now what? You can't go more than a week without finding out that somebody got shot for like doing nothing. He was on his way home. He had soda. They killed him. That is the relationship African American communities have with the police. They've always had that relationship with the police. It's just that now people see it. There have always been really horrible things said to people. There have always been people demanding to know what you're doing here. How come you're here? I'm recording you on my cell phone because you're not supposed to be in my neighborhood. That is always been true. The difference is now you can put it online, people can see it. Right. So people feel like there's suddenly more racism. No, I don't think it's more. I think you are seeing what it is to be Black in America, which is totally different than what it is to be white in America. And I'm going to reiterate a thing I probably said last year. Racism is not a Black people problem. Racism is a white people problem. We aren't doing it. We aren't responsible for it. We aren't creating it. That is coming out of the majority population and not just at African Americans. That's coming out of the majority of the population at Hispanic Americans. And that comes also from Black America towards them. It's also coming out of the majority at Asian Americans. You want to know how you stop racism? Stop doing it. Because the people who it's being focused at, they can't do anything about it. It's like rape, right? Women cannot stop rape. How do you stop rape? Tell men not to do it. Stop men from doing it. It won't happen.
Right. Right. It's not a question of making your skirts longer or
No,
not acting
pretty
seductively. Right.
whatever. It's
Okay.
not your fault.
Describe how Juneteenth and Kwanzaa have similarities and differences. I always thought Kwanzaa was religious.
No. Kwanzaa
Okay.
is not a religious holiday. I wrote a book about this called The Story of Kwanzaa. Kwanzaa is not a religious holiday. So basically, Juneteenth is based around emancipation, right? The idea that we are free, that thing. Kwanzaa is also is definitely an activist festival, and it's not a holiday, it's a festival, and it takes place over the course of 6 days, and each day has its own, or 7 days, and each day has its own word, and it is about building the African American community. So, like, for instance, one of the words day 5 is nia, which is purpose. So you need to have a purpose that you are working towards in your life. Kujichagulia, self-determination. You decide who you are. Don't let society or anyone else tell you who you have to be. So Kwanzaa was created based on the Nguzo Saba, the 7 principles of, well, success in life, really. And they're
In what language?
What now?
In
Swahili.
what language?
I'm sorry, it's Swahili. They use Swahili because it's a Pan-African language. So it has rituals that is surrounded that you do, and it's about storytelling. And it's also a day where almost every day you need to go out into the community and do something. So, for instance, there are days when you are encouraged to donate things, days when you are encouraged to work at a, like either a soup kitchen or facility, days when you are encouraged to go and shop in ethnically and businesses that are local, owned by people of color. So that and the idea is that you do them all year you are supporting your community. It is a way to combat the systematic destruction of Black families and Black communities. And the idea is that you do it at the end of the year, and that to remind you that that is what your job is all year long. So Kwanzaa really is about that. The Kwanzaa means first fruits. So it's the beginning of the year. What is your responsibility to your community, to yourself, to your family, and how do we go forward to make that happen in the world?
Okay. We've gotten several comments about local celebrations of Juneteenth. Let's see. Numerous local organizations made up primarily of white members will participate in the local Juneteenth parade. That seems very appropriate.
Right. Why not celebrate it? Why can't it be like another 4th of July? And why do we celebrate
Absolutely.
it?
It's starting on June 19th at 9:30 at the Baha'i House of Worship in Wilmette. And then City of Evanston sponsored Juneteenth celebration. Ingram Park with music, Sounds of E-Town starts at 7 p.m. So yes, there's plenty of information available on the city websites. Okay, Lenore's comment is today, approximately 170 years later, we are in the same place.
That is not lost on Black folks. Trust me on this. But think about it. Think about it like this. This morning I was talking to someone about this. Every action as people has a reaction to something, right? Call that blowback, right? So one could say that in the 90s, we armed the Afghans and we armed all of these militants who were fighting against Saudi Arabia or somebody. And then in the 2000s, those very same people started fighting back and destroyed countries. And then 9/11 happened. And so then we went back in and began blowing things. I mean, it's a cycle, right? Well, socially, we have the same kind of cycle. All the people were brought here. We built our half of our economy, the richest part really, because it was in the South, right? Our economics were built on enslavement. Then we blew that up. and then we had to build it on something else. But there was still this idea that these people shouldn't be thinking they're exactly like us because we enslaved them. So we put all these laws and then finally people were like, this is bad. And they blew that up, and then things start going again. And then in Georgia, this last time around, we ended up with Democrats and Black people and the same people who are freaked out about the idea that there should be some kind of level playing field are freaked out about the idea that they might not have power. And what does that mean? So the very same laws that had been struck down at the end of Jim Crow, which were prevented from happening by the Voters' Rights Act, which got thrown out in 2013 because Obama became the president, so we're post-racial, are now making it possible for us to go back to the Jim Crow era, where the same things that stopped Black people and people of color from voting are now, they're trying to use them to stop Black people from voting. Only now they're suddenly discovering that it's also going to stop some of their own voters, but they're willing to do that if they can get most Democrats not to vote. It's just cycling.
Well, I'm glad that you're optimistic, because I and many of my friends get depressed watching the news.
Well, here's something that I think, I don't know if this is gonna make you feel any worse or any better, but here's a reality. People of color have been watching the powers that be work so hard to strip our rights away for generations. And it always requires something to happen. They go one step too far, something blows up, and then we have to fight for them. If we're lucky, while we're fighting for them, there'll be somebody in charge who's willing to put laws in place to help us. Clearly, you can see that only matters for a while, because then they will just take your rights away and strip you of your rights. For the very first time in America's society, the powers that be are taking rights from white people. That's not a thing that happens to y'all. That is not a thing you are used to experiencing. It's freaking you out. The number of white men who committed suicide in the last decade or so has been rising. But this is because for the first time ever, they are experiencing something that Black men have experienced, which is you can work as hard as you can and the laws are preventing you from going forward. It's depressing. But the story that has been told to white America is everything belongs to you and you will always do better and everything is okay. So when you are encountering this for the first time, there's despair, because it's not something that you have know even what it looks like. White America, especially rural white America, forever votes against its own interests because it thinks that Black people are coming for them, when in truth, the people who are making the laws are coming for them, because they are on the same economic level with a lot of the Black people they're voting against, not understanding that by hurting them, they're hurting themselves. So again, it's really about the stories we tell ourselves and how incredibly destructive they often are. Wendy, the world is not about to end. But the truth is, if you want your rights, you have to fight for them, like every other person of color in the country. Because the people who have them, and most of whom are old white penis wielding Americans. Excuse my language. There's nothing wrong with that. I am married to a lovely Jewish man who is heading straight for old white dude status. It's not that they are particularly trying to hurt anybody. Well, some of them might be, but it's mostly that they're looking around at a changing demographic and they're trying to figure out how to hold on to power. And unfortunately, for the very first time in American history, it's hitting people who are educated enough to realize that they're also at the pointy end of it.
Okay, moving right along. Was Jim Crow a person?
I have no idea. I should know that. I could look it up. You know what? Everyone in this room probably has a telephone. Google it and find out.
Okay. So Jim Crow is just the overall description for things that...
It's the laws. My suspicion is it may be a person who put the first raft of these laws in place.
Okay.
That's my suspicion.
So Texas was the last state to make the slaves aware of Juneteenth, that the word had not trickled down.
It just, I mean, think about it. So like, I forget which president this was that died like 50 days after he was inaugurated. It was like McHenry or something like that.
Harrison.
He died like
he wasn't wearing a hat or a top coat.
Right. He was talking and it was, he got pneumonia, he died. It took 115 days before they found out about it in California. Because someone had to ride out there and let him know. Okay. We're used to really quick communication, but for the most part in human history, it didn't exist. It just took that long for someone to get there and tell them what was going on.
Okay. Let's see. Penny says, I like the idea of Juneteenth being the day of truth. I like that too. Okay. Marilyn says, Governor Abbott has signed a law establishing the 1836 Project, which according to him promotes patriotic education and ensures future generations understanding Texas values. But
that thing that Trump put it together, that's what he signed into law?
No, because I think the Texas legislature just passed that they're not allowed to teach
the 1619 project.
Yes, the governor may have. Marilyn, we have to investigate that further.
Okay. I know there are people who freaked out about the 1619 project because that's a little too much truth in one place, and they feel like it would make people unhappy, and that can't happen.
Okay. Janet, were your audiences all white people in the North Carolina mountains? Yes.
Homogenous, that's what I would say.
Okay, here's a comment from Faye. Wonderful presentation. Juneteenth reminds me of our Passover story. And every year we tell the story of our ancestors being enslaved by the Egyptians, but how we have to keep fighting for anyone who is still being held down. In Hebrew, we call it part of Tikkun Olam, healing the world. Thanks so much.
I got to tell you, the first time I went to a Seder, a friend of mine was marrying a Jewish man. I was right out of university. She was Catholic. I was raised Catholic. She was like, I don't want to be the only Catholic person here. Will you come? I was like, what do I bring? She said, bring a honey cake. I said, what is that?
No!
She said,
Passover?
I don't know. She said, go to what was it?
Kosher Jewel.
Jewel, right. Go to Jewel Osco, find a kosher something and bring it. I was like, kosher, what I know. Anyway, so I brought something for Passover. And then they started passing the Haggadah around. And I got it. And I was the first one to have Baruch Atah Adonai. And I went, brouhaha. Anyway, I loved the Seder. I loved it so much. I was like, I understand.
It's a story. It is a story. It is the most, children remember that holiday more than any other because it's a story.
Well, all I can say is we celebrate Seder at my house because my husband is Jewish and we did all the way through our lives. We celebrate. I love them.
Okay.
Writing the history of Jim Crow in there. He's a theater character, they're saying.
In the 1830s, the white actor Thomas Dartmouth, Daddy Rice, was propelled to stardom for performing minstrel routines as the fictional Jim Crow, a caricature of a clumsy, dim-witted, Black enslaved man.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I knew somebody would know. I mean, I just didn't, I've never wanted to be honest, I've never thought to look that up. Or if I did, I don't remember what it was.
And let's see. Jim Crow was a way of talking about local laws, also a minstrel, not a real person. Thank you, Jane. He said the character was modeled after an elderly Black man singing a tune called Jump Jim Crow in Louisville, Kentucky.
That is actually not true.
Okay.
No, I mean that might be something that we said, but and I think that the song is called "Every Time I Turn Around, I Jump Jim Crow." it is a song that is attributed to Black people, but was created by white people.
Okay. Well, in any event, it wasn't meant to be a compliment. We know that.
Oh no.
Right.
Minstrel shows were not about that. Thank you. Whoever looked that up. Thank you.
Several people. Okay, that's pretty much it. This was great. So interesting, so current and relevant and informative. And we had all kinds of good discussion. So lots of audience participation. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. Hopefully the next time you speak to us, there will be some people, you'll probably be still in North Carolina. I'm just, because eventually we'll be having in-person events, but you'll still be virtual because unless you're in the neighborhood and, visiting relatives or something else.
Well, I come up to the Chicago area a lot, usually like 3 times a year. So.
Great. So maybe we'll coordinate offline and figure out when. So, because we don't have a budget for travel, but if you're going to be in the neighborhood, then yeah, we'd love to have you. I'd love to meet you in person.
And bump elbows.
Honey, if we meet in person, I'm hugging you.
Fair enough. I'm vaccinated. It's all good.
Okay, as am I. Folks, next week, we are having another special lecture. So, sorry, I'm forgetting ensemble. The gentleman, Mark, hang on. Larson, I'm sorry. Mark Larson, who spoke to us about the Chicago theater scene, and he wrote that very thick compendium of Chicago theater from the 1950s to the present day, is working on a book. It's a book in development on a retrospective of Ed Asner's life. And he is going to be sharing with us some of his interviews with people who worked with Ed Asner, Ed Asner's family, Ed Asner himself. He's going to be sharing all kinds of pictures and audio clips, as well as he has special guests coming. Joyce Willefant, who wrote this book, played Mary Slaughter's wife in the Mary Tyler Moore Show. So she was an actress and she worked with Ed Asner. And then Jennifer Keeshan Armstrong, who wrote this book, has interviewed everybody with the cast. And I finished this book last night. It's a fascinating, detailed story of how the whole show came to happen. And it was really, really interesting. And I was not one of those rabid fans who watched every single episode, but I thought it was really interesting. So Mark is going to have these two women on a special guest. We're going to have this very interesting discussion. I'm going to be in the background, but they're going to have a very interesting discussion. It's going to be all about Ed Asner, and it promises to be fabulous. So I hope you'll join us. Donna, thank you so much. It was so great to see you. Have a wonderful rest of the week. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and we'll see you next Tuesday.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.